Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Katherine Ceicys, and this is Nashville. Welcome, everyone. I'm sitting in for Khalil Alona, and today we're talking about the U.S. Foreign Service and Civil Service. When I was in college, I knew I wanted to study political science, specifically international relations, which is about how countries get along or how they don't. I spent the next few years in classes studying wars and conflicts in detail. As I did, I became very interested in the work of diplomats, who are the people on the ground working to build and strengthen relationships between countries, often to avoid war, or who are instrumental in helping ending conflicts. They became my heroes. As I thought about what to do after I graduated, I didn't realize that there was a path for me to become a diplomat by working for the U.S. State Department. In fact, I don't think that most people here in Tennessee realize that they could do that too. If you want to work for the State Department, though, there are a few things you need to know. The State Department oversees the Foreign Service and the Civil Service. Foreign Service officers mostly serve abroad, often in U.S. embassies in other countries. Civil Service officers support the State Department's broader mission and are usually stationed here in the U.S. Joining us to break all of this down and tell us more is Lou Fintor, the diplomat in residence for the North Central region, which includes Tennessee. Basically, he's the point person for anyone here in the state who wants to learn about a career in the State Department. Lou himself has worked for the State Department for 20 years, including serving tours in Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, and Yemen. Lou, welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thanks, Katherine, for having us today.
So glad you're here. So I imagine that you get this question a lot, but can you please explain the difference between the Foreign Service and the Civil Service?
Sure, absolutely. The way to think about the difference between these two categories is civil service is primarily domestic. Foreign service is primarily overseas. However, there is some crossover. Civil servants do serve overseas at times, and foreign service officers do serve domestically. This is a domestic assignment, the one I'm doing now.
You actually came to the State Department after having an established career elsewhere. Can you briefly tell us what point in your life you came into the State Department and what some of the work that you've done there has been?
Sure, absolutely. So I actually had two other careers before I came to the State Department. First, as a journalist, right out of undergrad and then grad school. I went to a grad school and got a master's in journalism. I worked in Washington, D.C. as a newspaper reporter. And then as an epidemiologist, I went back to school, got a master's in public health, and then went back to Washington and did breast cancer research at the National Institutes of Health and then later the CDC. I always had an interest in foreign affairs, in international affairs, and so decided to look at a career serving overseas, and the State Department seemed like the best fit for me. When I was a reporter, I covered the State Department from time to time, and so knew a little bit about it, but not a lot about how to become a foreign service officer or a civil servant. So I thought it would be a good vehicle for me to both serve my country and also to travel and live abroad.
What were you most excited about with the idea of living and working abroad?
I think the ability to represent the U.S. abroad, to experience different cultures, to interact with different kinds of people overseas, while at the same time advancing U.S. interests and protecting Americans. I think working in the Foreign Service gives you really a variety of different kinds of opportunities to do that. Even when we're in Washington or when we're traveling domestically, we interact with a wide range of different kinds of people, and it gives us a window into how they live. It gives us a window into their culture, and it also gives us an opportunity to explain ours.
Yeah, well, as the diplomat in residence now, it seems like you're interacting much more with American citizens. Can you tell us what you do in your job right now?
I'm primarily a recruiter in the North Central region, and the North Central region is Michigan, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. So I travel throughout the region and I speak to students, university, college, and also community college students, as well as mid-career professionals, telling them about the department, about what we do, and how they can work with us either in student programs or in career programs.
So even though you have a domestic assignment, it sounds like you still keep up with travel a good bit.
A lot, actually.
Well, let's start focusing on the Foreign Service. So the people who work in the Foreign Service can have different specialties. Can you explain the difference between a Foreign Service generalist and a Foreign Service specialist?
Sure. So we have generalists, and I am a generalist, and we have specialists. So generalists really are come from five different specialties or what we call cones: management, public diplomacy, consular, political, and economic. So our Foreign Service officers pick one of those five areas when they apply to the Foreign Service to become a Foreign Service officer, regardless of the background they come from. Specialists are people who have a high degree of technical ability, skill, and or experience and training in a particular technical area. So those are things like medicine, nursing, IT, financial management, office management. Because when you think about an embassy abroad, an embassy is like a small city, and we require people with those kinds of skills in order to effectively run the embassy. You need IT support, you need a medical unit, you need a motor pool, you need a management component. So our specialists are extremely important to us and to the embassy in facilitating our ability to do our jobs overseas.
So if someone's, say, a nurse and they want to become a Foreign Service specialist and, they would be serving as a nurse, are they there for the people who work at the embassy that people can just, they have a cold and they go see the embassy nurse?
So absolutely, that's one role for them, but they also act as liaison to the local medical community. So they do things like meet with hospital administrators or meet with medical professionals in the community. They can implement training programs. They can work out relationships between the embassy and that particular healthcare institution, or with a ministry of public health or a ministry of health in a particular country, to help affect improvements around healthcare, to facilitate exchange programs where health professionals from the country we're serve in the United States. So it's really a wide range of different kinds of roles that they play. They can also travel regionally. So we have nurses who travel around a particular region and visit different missions or meet with medical professionals when they're abroad.
Wow. So I know there's a lot of governmental abbreviations and kind of jargon, and one of those things are the cones. Do you know why for generalists? And my take on that is kind of like if you have a liberal arts degree, you can kind of go into different jobs because you'll be trained on the job. But do you know why the five cones, the consular, economic, management, political, and public affairs, do you know why they're called cones?
That's a really good question. And I think it's a historical question. Now, actually, we refer to them as career tracks. So officially, they're no longer called cones. And I think for the reason, kind of that you are alluding to, people really don't know what a cone is. A cone is like an ice cream cone. What's a cone? So we now officially refer to them as career tracks. And as you said, as a generalist, you can come from any sort of background, any sort of academic background. So that's everything from, music to performing arts to journalism to history to political science. You don't have to speak a foreign language, which a lot of people think you do in order to qualify for the Foreign Service. We'll teach you a language that you need to know in order to be effective in your assignment. You don't need a graduate degree. You can actually get a graduate degree while you're in the Foreign Service. We have mid-career programs that allow you to do that while you're working. Really, you can come from any sort of walk of life. We in the Foreign Service represent the United States. We know the United States is a very diverse country. We want our workforce to represent America in all of its diversity. That's a strength when you're overseas. I think demonstrating to foreign audience just how diverse we are speaks to why we are such a rich country. And demonstrating that to an audience, there's really no better way than having diversity in our ranks.
Well, no matter what background someone's coming from, they have to go through an application and interview process, and it might be fair to say that it can be a little bit extensive. Now, there are different ways to get into the Foreign Service, but I believe most people take the Foreign Service Officer Test, which is known to be pretty challenging, and some people have to take it multiple times before they pass it. Can you briefly just tell us, why is this test considered to be difficult?
Yeah, a really good question. And it does come up a lot. I don't think it's that the test is difficult, but I do think the test is broad. I mean, it's designed really to pulse all the things you know about the United States. I mean, when you think about it, your job is to represent the United States when you're abroad. So to do that, you have to know the United States, geography, history, political science, things that pertain to our country, because those are the kinds of questions you're going to get that cover those topics from foreign audiences when you're overseas. So the questions you get on the Foreign Service Officers Test are broad. That test is offered 3 times a year. So it's offered in February, in June, and then in October. You register online the month before. It's free. You don't have to pay to take the test. It's offered virtually. I get questions all the time about how do I prepare for the test? Watch the news, read newspapers, keep up with what's going on in the world, because it is a test that's designed to measure your knowledge about your country.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so let's just say that everything goes smoothly and someone passes the test, whether it's the first time or the third time. What happens next, just briefly, in the interview process from finishing the test to officially taking a position?
So part of the process, part of the registration process includes submitting a series of very short, what we call personal narratives. Because we come from a variety of backgrounds, so we look at you as a person, we look at the total candidate. And to do that, we try to pulse your personal qualities. Once you take the test and your personal narratives are submitted and evaluated, a determination is made whether you should move further. At that point in time, because as you said, you can take the test again a year later if you don't get a passing score, or if your essays don't make it through the personal narrative evaluation, you can take the test again. You can register again the following year. But if you do get through that point, you move to an interview phase. We call that the assessment. You go to Washington, D.C. It's about 3/4 of a day. You're with a very small group of other candidates who have also gotten to that stage. And there are 3 exercises, a very short written exercise. There's a personal interview, a structured interview, and then there's a group exercise. At the end of that day, you go home and then you find out whether you will move to your security clearance, because we do require all of our officers, and actually for that matter, even our students who do internships and fellowships, to have a security clearance and a medical clearance. Once you get through both of those, you go on what we call the register. Each of those career tracks that I mentioned has its own register, and candidates are placed on that register in rank order of their performance at the assessment. Once a class is put together, an incoming Foreign Service Officer class, we draw from each of those registers. So management, econ, public diplomacy, consular, all comprise an incoming Foreign Service Officer class.
It sounds like quite the process. How long does it usually take from when someone finishes the test to knowing if they've gotten in or not? And I understand with security clearances that might vary in the time, but just to give us an idea, how long can that take?
The process can be lengthy. We're looking at 9 to 12 months or even longer. And so what I always tell applicants is, while you're doing this, have a plan A. This is really your plan B. This is something you can continue to pursue while you're already working in another job, or you're going to graduate, whatever you're doing, Peace Corps, volunteer work. This is something you can pursue while you're doing something else, because of that sort of lengthy process. And as you said, a big piece of that is often the background investigation for the security clearance. I always tell applicants not to be intimidated by that process. People will often say to me, well, I have this parking ticket, or, I paid my MasterCard bill late. And, so those are really not the kinds of things that are being evaluated. So I always tell applicants, don't be intimidated by the medical clearance. The State Department has accommodation. So we definitely go the full length to make sure when officers get to that point, they're going to get in. The key is that you have to be worldwide available, that you have to be willing to go anywhere that you're assigned. But I mean, this process can be lengthy. And so it's really important that while you're doing this, you're also doing something else.
Yeah, and I believe the worldwide availability, you really have to be willing to go anywhere. And people, when they get their first post, from what I understand, in a ceremony that's Flag Day, you can put in preferences, but you ultimately don't know where you're going to go. Where was your first post?
So my first post was Kabul, my first overseas post. And I was there for a year. That was back in 2006, 2005. And then I went back in 2016 after a year of Dari language. And this time I was 2 years in Kabul, but in the same position. And that is quite common in the Foreign Service. You can serve in one place and then go back to that place later on in your career, or stay in a particular region. Most people will usually focus on one or two or three different regions. Some people like to go lots of different regions, but you pretty much drive your career, as you said, after the first two assignments, because all Foreign Service officers, when they come in, have to do a consular assignment first. So that's required of all generalist incoming Foreign Service officers. And the reason for that is because consular work, which is doing things like visa interviews and issuing passports and assisting American citizens, often when they get in trouble, we're the first point of contact for them or their families. We all have to know how to do those kinds of things, because in an emergency, or an evacuation, we all become essentially consular officers. So we all have to know how to do that job. And that's why you have some limited input into where you're going to go when you're an incoming Foreign Service officer. But it's not until you finish that consular assignment that you then really are bidding, or you are determining yourself where you want to go next.
Well, I have traveled abroad, and I've always known there's a U.S. embassy somewhat nearby, but I'm really grateful to know that the people who work there have the training and can help with emergency situations, but also just, if I had a friend who lost a passport and the embassy was there to help. Well, Lou, thank you so much for filling us in on some of the basics. We're going to check back with you a little bit later to learn more. Lou Finter is the diplomat in residence for the North Central region. Thank you so much for sharing, Lou.
Thank you, Catherine.
We have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk with two Foreign Service officers who grew up here in Tennessee to hear what it's really like to work in the Foreign Service. Stay with us.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Katherine Ceicys, filling in today for Kalila Kalona, and this is Nashville. Welcome back. Today we're talking about career paths in the U.S. State Department. Joining us now are two mid-career Foreign Service officers, Joanna Wolfsberg and Paul Wolfsberg. Joanna and Paul are siblings who grew up in Murfreesboro, and we are so grateful to have them here with us today. Joanna and Paul, welcome to This is Nashville.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so you are both remote. Can you tell us where you guys are right now?
I'm in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., Arlington, Virginia, to be exact. Right now, I'm studying Arabic at the Foreign Service Institute, which is part of the State Department, where diplomats go to learn languages and get other training.
Wow. And Paul, what about you?
And I am living in Boston right now, but I'm back and forth between Boston and Washington, working for the Bureau of Global Public Affairs, basically working with social media influencers to help get the State Department's messages out.
Okay. Well, so between the two of you, Joanna is older, but Paul, you have been with the State Department a little bit longer, for about 11 years. And Joanna, you've been in for about 8. Can you briefly tell us, both of you, just where you've been posted and what you've done in your post so far in your career?
Sure, I can start.
Well, you're older, so go ahead.
Okay. But this will take less time because I haven't served quite as many places as Paul has. So my first post was in Dubai. I studied Farsi language there because that's where Iranian visa applicants come to do their visa interviews. So I was doing a consular tour in Dubai. Then I served in London where I did more consular work, but actually it was a really wide variety, doing everything from visiting Americans in prison to preparing for a presidential visit. Then most recently, I served domestically here at the State Department in the Office of International Religious Freedom, reporting on how well other countries are doing in terms of allowing freedom of religion or belief to everyone in the country. And then now, as I said, I'm in Arabic training, getting ready to go overseas again.
Wow. And Paul, what about you?
And I've been based mostly in the Mediterranean/Middle East and North Africa. So I started off after Turkish language training. I went to Cyprus, where I also had the portfolio of human rights and religious freedom. And then after that, I did one of the consular tours doing visa work that Lou mentioned in the previous segment. So I was interviewing Jordanians who were trying to travel to the US, to study at an American university or maybe to visit family, or it could be for an immigrant visa to go live in the US permanently. And then finally, my last tour overseas was at the US Embassy in Algeria, where I was the embassy spokesperson.
So it sounds like you guys have both had the opportunity to learn other languages. Do languages come easily to you?
I think they do, yeah. So we both had the experience of living in Germany when we were little. It was really our only time living outside of Tennessee until we both went away to college. And German was the first foreign language I learned. I also have a background in music as a classically trained singer. So for that, I learned Italian and French, and then later studied Turkish, lived in Turkey for a while, and have since, with the State Department, studied Farsi and now Arabic.
Paul, what about for you? Do languages come easily to you?
Well, so Joanna's more of the polyglot in the family. I've really just learned lots of dialects of one language, Arabic, because Arabic is extremely complicated and really varies a lot from country to country how they speak the dialect. But the State Department has also trained me in Turkish, and then before I went to Algeria, in French, because the local dialect there is kind of a mix of Arabic and French.
So when you're taking these classes, when you're getting the language training, like for me, I'm always someone who can understand a language much more easily than I can speak it. It sounds like you guys have good proficiency, but have there been students that have been with you in the Foreign Service who just struggle, but, find a way through?
I'd say it's just part of the process to a certain extent. There are always people with different strengths and weaknesses, but what you're talking about being able to comprehend first before you can speak, I think that's just a natural part of the language process. FSI, the Foreign Service Institute, where I'm studying now, does a really good job of tailoring classes to different students' needs. There are only a maximum of 4 students in each class, so it's really and some of them are smaller than that. So it's very individualized instruction, and you're always with native speakers of the language. And they do a good job of thinking about what might be holding you back from doing your best at the language. So it's a great way to learn.
I would add they're also very focused on the language that you'll need for your job. So it's not just a purely academic exercise. You're really focused on learning the language variant that you're going to need when you're at the country, whether you're doing visa work or you're doing political reporting. You're going to be needing different sets of vocabularies in those cases, and they cater to that.
Okay. Well, you guys are also siblings. Do you know of any other siblings who are also in the Foreign Service together? Not that you're posted together, but that both signed up.
I do, but actually, I just thought I'd share a story about when Paul and I were posted in the same country temporarily. He did a detail assignment, as we call them, in Abu Dhabi while I was in Dubai. And one time a visa applicant came to my window and I saw that, someone named Wolfsburg had interviewed him and I assumed it was me. And the standard policy is that we can't interview someone whom we have already refused for a visa for reasons of impartiality and fairness to the applicant. So I said, I'm sorry, it looks like I've already interviewed you. I'm going to need to send you to another window for where another officer will interview you. And the applicant said, no, you didn't interview me before. And I said, it looks as if I did. And he said, no, you didn't interview me. It was a man. And so then I realized that it had been Paul who interviewed him. I think that was the only time it happened. But when there are siblings in the Foreign Service, I guess these things can come up. I do know a couple of other sibling pairs and actually served with one of a pair of identical twins as my boss right after his identical twin had trained me in how to do the job. And that was very confusing.
Oh my gosh. Okay, wow. Well, it sounds like it can be a family affair sometimes. If you're just tuning in, I'm Katherine Ceicys, your host for today in for Khalil Ekalona. We're talking about the U.S. State Department's Foreign Service. We're joined right now by Joanna Wolfsburg and Paul Wolfsburg, who are both Foreign Service officers who grew up in Murfreesboro. Well, Paul, you jumped in first. What was it about working in the Foreign Service that was initially so appealing to you?
So I would say what really got me interested in the Foreign Service after our experience spending several months in Germany as kids was after college. So I was really interested in Middle Eastern history and wanted to learn Arabic, but my college, this was just before 9/11, so my college didn't have any Arabic courses. And I moved to Egypt in order to learn Arabic full time, basically. And I ended up finding this wonderful Egyptian family in a little village outside Cairo to live with. So it was a homestay experience. And I was completely immersed in the Arabic language and Egyptian culture. And that kind of made me start thinking about the Foreign Service, not just because I had the travel bug and liked going from country to country, but also I think for all of my Egyptian neighbors in that village, I was already representing America in a meaningful sense. There were literally no other foreigners living in the entire village. And so whenever someone had a question about America or even about the West writ large, they would come to me. So that experience made me think about being a diplomat so I could tell America's stories to the world, especially in the Arab world, and help people understand, even with these little day-to-day interactions, that America is a much more complicated place than the stereotypes that a lot of global audiences will see in the news or in movies.
I would imagine that telling those stories and getting that message across just be really interesting. And part of the way that you did that when you were in Algeria, you were the spokesperson for the embassy there. And I understand you also created quite a bit of social media in that role. What kind of posts were you creating?
So we had all kinds of posts. We did videos talking about economic cooperation with U.S. businesses that were investing in Algeria, even fun videos about learning English, because the younger generation of Algerians over the last decade, they've been pivoting away from the French that's taught in the schools, and they're learning English, often on their own. And they really want to connect to the outside world, and English is a key that opens that door for them. And our social media outreach was very successful. There were a few other Americans like myself that were completely fluent in Arabic. And by the time we left Algeria 3 years later, I was being recognized on the streets all the time by at least half of the people that I saw in the capital. So for them, we represented America, whereas before they might not have felt like they personally knew any Americans.
Was that fun for you?
It was. By the end, it got to be a little much. I'd never been a celebrity of any type before. So being recognized everywhere got to be a little much. It was kind of nice to be able to come back to Boston and be quietly anonymous again.
Yeah, some people love that. And some people, it's not their cup of tea. Well, Joanna, so you saw Paul in the Foreign Service before you joined. Initially, when you made the choice to start moving towards that path, what did you want most out of potentially working in the Foreign Service?
I really wanted, many of the same things that Paul and Lou have talked about, being able to help Americans overseas and build connections between ordinary Americans and ordinary people in whatever country I ended up serving in. I love learning languages. I love travel. And all of these things really appealed to me about the Foreign Service. At the same time, I really enjoyed that I get to basically do quite a different job every 2 to 3 years, switching from doing visa interviews to reporting on religious freedom to doing more public diplomacy outreach kind of work. And I really liked that variety in the career. So that was part of what interested me about the Foreign Service as well.
Some people work really hard to master their work and it takes a while and they kind of settle in. But with having different posts and having different positions, you're stepping into different roles. And it sounds like you liked that variety. But why doesn't the State Department keep people longer in a post or in the same type of job in different places around the world?
That's a great question. The State Department and the government as a whole consider it very important that people not become too attached to any single country where they're serving to the point where they might forget that they're Americans first and that they're not natives of whatever country they're serving. And longer tours in a single country could potentially impact that. It's also part of government policy that we diplomats have to come home to the US for a while between tours and get some of that quality time readjusting to living in the United States. So we have to do that between every tour.
When you're abroad and working and people ask you where you're from, do you say the United States or do you say Tennessee? Or does it just depend?
I guess it would depend. In somewhere like the UK, when I served in London, people know the United States a bit better. And so I might say that I'm from Tennessee, or I would say near Nashville, maybe if they know the US pretty well. In other contexts, I would probably say the United States. And if they asked, for details, I would say near Nashville.
And for me, when I was in Egypt or Algeria or Jordan, I would say, yeah, people wouldn't recognize Tennessee right off the bat. But if I said it's in the South next to Kentucky, they usually knew Kentucky, although they knew it in the context of Kentucky Fried Chicken. So that usually got a laugh out of them because they thought of Kentucky as this restaurant chain.
Interesting.
Yes. Now, London actually has a Tennessee Fried Chicken chain, which I'm sure is a copyright violation, but it was nice to see that sign instead of Kentucky Fried Chicken for a change.
Okay, well, you both have kids. What would you tell people about serving in the Foreign Service with a family? What do you actually need to make that work for everyone?
I have really loved the experience of having a child and being in the Foreign Service. It is really wonderful to feel like you're really close as a family because you do everything together and you experience all of these new things together. The State Department does make sure that your child can have English language education that's equivalent to the education they would get in the US. And so that's really great to have that, to have that provided for you. You don't have to rely on local schools that may or may not be of the best quality. So that is an excellent aspect of being in the Foreign Service as well.
Yeah, exactly. The State Department really provides a lot of support. It's not like Foreign Service families are landing and then we're on our own in Kazakhstan or wherever it is trying to figure things out. Like with military families, we have the housing and the kids' education is provided for. And also every embassy has quite a few jobs that are designated for American spouses. And then the embassy also goes out of its way to provide social opportunities to help new arrivals integrate. So it's really, the Foreign Service is a great opportunity for families that want to give their kids exposure to other cultures and learn new languages and understand the world better.
Do you guys know down the road, maybe not, I think you have your next assignment set, but do you have any goals for places that you want to go that you haven't served in yet?
I talk about it with my husband a lot because this is a family business in a certain way. And we do talk about places we'd like to go together. Since I've served in the Middle East and Europe up to this point, I'd love to go somewhere outside of that, possibly Africa or in the East Asia region.
Paul, what about you?
And for me, I'm headed next to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, but I'll actually be working in the U.S. mission to Yemen because our embassy inside Yemen has been closed since 2015 due to the conflict there. So I know where I'll be for the next several years, but After that, I would love to go to Turkey or maybe to a couple of the countries in the Middle East that I haven't been to yet.
Seems like that region speaks to you. Joanna and Paul, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Joanna Wilsberg and Paul Wursberg are both Foreign Service officers from Middle Tennessee. We have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk with a Tennessee native who is working in the civil service. Stay with us. I'm Katherine Ceicys, filling in today for Kalila Kalona, and this is Nashville. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're talking about what it's like to have a career in the U.S. State Department. Joining us now to tell us more about the civil service is Shivangi Sutaria, who is currently the Learning and Engagement Lead in the Bureau of Consular Affairs. And returning to the conversation is Lou Fintor, the diplomat in residence for the North Central region, which is another way of saying he's the point person for anyone interested in pursuing a career in the State Department who happens to live in Tennessee. Shivangi, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Lou, welcome back.
Thanks, Catherine.
Shivangi, you grew up here in Middle Tennessee and are an MTSU graduate. You've been with the State Department for almost 9 years. Can you tell us, what did you study at MTSU?
Hi, yes, I ended up graduating with a bachelor's degree in organizational communications and a master's degree in higher education administration and supervision.
So did you see yourself taking a step towards the civil service while you were in school, or is that something that happened after?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Catherine, I think it's so great that you're doing a segment like this. 9 years ago, when I applied for the department, there wasn't a lot of information out there. I feel like, especially because I grew up in rural Tennessee, it's a career choice that we just weren't exposed to very much. And so when I was studying at MTSU my freshman year, I studied abroad in London during the summer of 2012. It also coincided with the Olympics. And I was taking a course to understand terrorism and planning for large-scale events from a security perspective. So our class met with the U.S. Embassy staff in London to discuss how they were participating in security measures for American citizens. Through that discussion with the embassy, I learned about the USA Jobs website and how to apply for federal jobs. Later, I was graduating early with my bachelor's degree by a year, and I was really involved in my university, such as the Student Government Association. And I was trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do? And so I remembered USA Jobs at that moment. And I honestly applied for just one job and a master's program at the same time. And the job at the time was to be a passport specialist. And I just thought, wow, passports, maybe I'll get to see the world. And that was my inspiration.
Did you know what the job was, or were you like, you know what, passports, that sounds cool, let's just give it a go?
I didn't fully know. I just thought that I wanted to serve others. I grew up in a small town where community was a big part of my upbringing and helping people. And I just thought, what better way to spend my life than to be of service to others and to be able to do that on a grand scale that's so much larger than my own life would be incredible.
Wow.
And I think like that's all I thought when I applied.
So, spoiler alert, you got the job. Where was that first job?
Yeah, I did get the job. To maybe like also share a bit with the listeners about that process. When I applied to USA Jobs, and I just blindly applied for one job, it did take a few months before I got a call one day. And when I picked up the call, it like my caller ID read United States Department of State. So, of course I picked up. And there was about 5 or 6 other people on the end, and there was like a panel, and they said, "Are you available for an interview right now?" And I was like, well, yes. So I had an on-the-spot interview that morning. I ended up graduating early from my master's degree as well through like a lot of support through my college. And I ended up moving to Portsmouth, New Hampshire the day after I graduated.
The day after you graduated. Wow. Did your family support what you were up to?
I think I was so fortunate to have so much support from my family, my community, even my college, my friends. Like at that time, I think everyone was just so supportive and encouraging. And I didn't fully realize that I was leaving my entire support system by moving so far away from home. But they were very thrilled and very proud that someone from their community would be serving the country.
Yeah. Were you able to find a support system once you landed on your feet?
Well, it's not easy. I think I also left pretty young, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, it's an absolutely beautiful historical town, a lovely community, but it's a very family-friendly community. And I think I was so young that when I got the opportunity to shift to Washington, D.C. and be more in the midst of like all the events and programming that the State Department puts on with everyone who moves to the city for these jobs and opportunities, it was a better fit for me.
I would imagine that the people who work in the Foreign Service or Civil Service have a lot of camaraderie, and it sounds like you found that. Lou, when you're talking with people about the path that's right for them, whether it's a civil service or foreign service, what stands out that makes the civil service a better fit for someone?
I think if you want to stay domestic, you want to be in Washington, D.C. Many of our civil service jobs, most of them are in Washington, D.C. at our headquarters. Then, and you want to be a subject matter expert in one particular area and stay in that area for most, if not all, of your career with the State Department, then the civil service is a good fit for you. One thing, I think it's important to point out here is that we very often have applicants who come into the civil service and into the foreign service sort of later in life, right? And so if you are interested in the department and you are someone that's a mid-career professional, civil service might be a good fit for you, but also the foreign service that you can apply to till you're 59 and a half.
59 and a half. Shivangi, can you speak to what it's like to join as a younger person? I know you talked about where your first job was and finding a better fit in Washington, D.C., but just in terms of like being right out of school and jumping into one of these jobs, was your youth an advantage or was there a steep learning curve? Or maybe both?
Honestly, I think I was just so excited to like have my first job, and I thought the work was really incredible. I was serving as a citizenship and nationality expert. I participated in several rotations through that role, from customer service through fraud rotations. Eventually, I capped out in my job series, and I was so young that I decided to apply for other rotations in the department. But I would say, like, regardless of your age or when you enter the department, just stay open, because there's so much you have to offer and so much of an impact you can make for our country that wherever you are, all of your experience, all of your background, it's going to be to serve to good use.
Well, you have served both here in the country and abroad. I understand that you've worked with Afghan refugees. You also helped launch an embassy. How do you choose what you're going to apply for or what positions you want to aim for? What guides you?
Yeah, I think for me personally, my main goal is to serve others and to go where there's a need. And that's kind of what I've done. So when I left Passports, the big issue at the time was the opioid epidemic. And so I wanted to go serve there, and I wanted to help communities that were suffering through it. And through that role, I gained more experience. And so I started learning about bilateral and multilateral policy goals. I wasn't a political science major, but I learned all of this through the job. So just like stay open to learning and be a lifelong learner and believe in yourself, because you can learn this stuff. And so through that role, my focus was more on programming. I learned about grants and the budget cycle and how to draft at the State Department level. As you develop those skills throughout your career, you'll keep getting opportunities. And then it's up to you, like if you want to take a risk or not. Whatever's like really spoken to me, wherever the need is, whatever strengths I have that can best support the department, I've always been open to that.
Is there either a need that you're seeing right now that you want to serve towards, or is there a skill that you have that you want to strengthen a little bit more or apply more in your work in terms of where you are headed next?
It's kind of a good day to ask the question. So at the moment, I'm the learning engagement lead for the Bureau of Consular Affairs, where I train our counselor folks around the world on project management techniques. And so on Monday, I'm starting a new assignment working with career management and passport services to oversee network-wide employee development. I'm really excited about it. I feel like it's a full circle moment for me, and I'll really be able to use my master's degree. So I'm looking forward to that. But I would say I'm open, right?
Yeah, it sure sounds like it. Well, Lou, everyone that we've spoken to today, including you, has talked about kind of feeling that desire to serve, that desire to contribute to the country. And there are different career paths that can provide an opportunity for that. Sometimes it's the military, sometimes it's the foreign service or the civil service, sometimes it's local law enforcement. What would you say to someone who's considering the military versus working for the State Department? What can be a good way to figure out which one of those paths is the right fit?
That's a great question, and I think it's really important to mention that we, in our role overseas and even domestically, very often work very closely, hand in glove with the military, as well as many other federal agencies. We also get many applicants who have a military background. Either they have served in the military, they're currently in the reserves, or they're even military retirees. They've retired from the military and want to make the jump over to us at the State Department. Each of us, has a lane, a particular role, and we are the civilian arm of foreign policy overseas. But we do work very closely with the military, and especially in the places that I've served, where there is a very often a strong, or was a very strong military presence. But I think when you're trying to discern what you want to do, you can do both. So consider that. You can do the State Department anyway, after a military career, or even while you're serving in the reserves.
Shivangi, you grew up in rural Tennessee. If you could speak to someone who feels so far away from either school or a graduate program, but is really interested in working in the civil service or finding a path forward to do something like you're doing and the career that you have, what would you say to that person about where to start?
Yeah, that's really a great question. I guess if my story helps serve as a good example, I'm first generation. I didn't really know anyone that worked for the government before. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where you come from. Even if you grew up in a small, amazing community like I did in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, it's I genuinely hadn't heard about a career in diplomacy ever growing up. It doesn't change the fact that every single person's perspective matters when it comes to democracy. We all have valuable ideas to contribute to the growth of our nation. We are stronger together. And I genuinely believe that everyone has something wonderful to offer the world. So even if you're just slightly interested in diplomacy, just go for it. Because it's really not about being the best. It's just about waking up every day and trying the best. Just trying your best. You work hard, you keep a good attitude, you stay humble, you try to be a good colleague, a good peer, a good representative of your country. You go home, you enjoy your family, and you get up and you do it all over again. And that's purpose for me.
Lou, in your current role, what is the purpose that you feel as you're talking to other people who are considering working in the Foreign Service? What gets you up every day?
I think it's first just really kind of informing them, sort of educating them on what we actually do, what the State Department does, because we are, a foreign facing agency. I mean, our role is primarily overseas. And so a lot of Americans, unless they go overseas or they have a reason to interact with us, really don't know a lot about what we do. So one of the things that sort of gets me up in the morning is being able to educate people about what it is we do, but also that they can become part of that. The average age of an incoming Foreign Service officer now is around 35. And so educating people about the fact that even though they may have another career or have two other careers, as I did, it's something open to them later in life, as well as when they graduate from college. And I also just want to mention, Shivangi mentioned USA Jobs, which is the primary way that you would apply to the civil service. And I say primary because if you're a student, we have a number of student programs that are mechanisms that allow you to come into the civil service or the Foreign Service. So we have fellowships that are designed to track into the Foreign Service, and we have Presidential Management Intern Program, which is a big national program for graduate students, and the Pathways Program, which is for undergraduates that actually are feeder programs into the civil service. And so my job is to help people navigate this sort of sea of opportunities and determine what they'd like to pursue, how they'd like to pursue it, and kind of be with them through the process, being able to troubleshoot for them.
Well, it sounds like you both have very interesting work. And Shivangi, whenever I send in any paperwork for an upcoming passport, I am going to know that maybe someone that you have trained or has worked with might be the person who receives that.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Shivangi and Lou, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Katherine.
Shivangi Sutaria is currently the Learning and Engagement Lead in the Bureau of Consular Affairs. Lou Fintor is the diplomat in residence for the North Central region. He is the point person for anyone interested in pursuing a career in the State Department from Tennessee. You can learn more about careers in the Foreign Service and the Civil Service by going to careers.state.gov. You can also find Lou's contact information there as well. We'll include all of this on our web post for the episode. Thank you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by me, Katherine Ceicys. Our amazing technical director and board operator is Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are Larange and Namir Blade. Special thanks to Pilar Kiwa. Listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. The conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram and tell us what you think of our show by filling out our quick survey online. You can also call and leave us a message at 615-760-2000. This is Nashville. I'm Katherine Ceicys. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody, and take good care.